Hi there, my name is Benjamin Davey, and in this course, I'm going to be taking you on a journey through the wildly misunderstood world of personal productivity. There's a lot of videos on the topic of productivity. I mean, you look no further than Thomas Frank or Ali Abdaal, and you will find fantastic videos that really get into the depths of how you can be more productive using practical tips and tools. And I think this is great. I think personally, I've gotten a lot of value out of these guys, and I think they do great content. I'm not here to do that sort of productivity course though. You see, my background is actually in psychology, and in particular, it's in neuropsychology and neuroscience in general. And essentially, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit more generally about how you can be a more productive person throughout your life and in the work you want to do as you continue to grow throughout your career. So if that sounds interesting to you, we're going to be going through a few different topics in this course. The first of which is we're going to be dissecting this hustle mindset that so many people will have heard of and subscribed to in the past. And essentially this involves this idea of grinding and getting work done all the time and trying to be as productive as possible by just doing the work and grinding through it. And then this also comes along with this idea of not taking breaks, just working as hard as you can. And, breaks are just unproductive time, so skip them completely. And then, of course, this mentality of sleep is for the weak. So don't worry about getting enough sleep. Just make sure that you work hard and that you get the job done, and sleep comes second. We're going to be talking a little bit about this whole concept and why I personally, and the research in psychology and neuroscience agrees with me, why I think this is actually incredibly damaging for people who actually want to be productive in the long term, who actually want to be able to get things done for a long time and to actually enjoy their life as well. So we're going to be dissecting that a little bit. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about this idea of stress. And for most people, I think stress naturally is a topic that evokes negative connotations. If you talk about the stress response, you generally think of a negative thing. This moment at which people are unproductive because they're too stressed to get work done. But this isn't actually entirely true. We're going to talk a little bit about the reality of stress and what stress actually can do for you, but also how it can have a negative impact as well, and sometimes a disastrous impact in some cases. So we're gonna look at that, and then we're gonna move on to looking at the environment in which you do your work. And of course, a lot of these videos by the guys I spoke about earlier, Ali Abdaal, Thomas Frank, and similar people, they've talked a bit about the environment in their videos, but I want to kind of take you through the psychological environment, or perhaps the psychological impact of your built and mental environment. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in that section over there, and especially in relation to the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic that we're seeing at the moment, with a lot of people having to do their work from home. And I'm sure this is having some pretty big impacts on how people are able to be productive throughout their day. So we're going to dissect this topic a little bit more here. And the other thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about this strategy called batching. And many of you will have heard of this idea of batching, but if you haven't, stay tuned because we're going to get into that in the later parts of this course. So in a nutshell, essentially, this course is all about the psychology of productivity, about how you can ensure that you get the most out of your brain, and that you're actually using your brain in the way that it was actually built to be used, and that you can really use the time you have in the most effective way while still enjoying the work you do. So there appears to be this general mindset, and it's called the hustle mindset, and essentially what it involves is this idea that if you want to get things done and you want to make a difference in the world, you just have to get out there and start grinding. You just need to start doing repetitive work over and over again, regardless of how much you're enjoying it, and just get it done. And this is something that actually sits quite contrary to my views on the whole topic of productivity, because as someone who specializes in psychology, I have some key issues with this particular mindset, and in particular because it flies in the face of something called flow. And many of you will have heard of the idea of flow. Essentially, it was a state of of work that was proposed by a psychologist that essentially involves working so intensely and so deeply on a task that you lose track of time, and you just suddenly, you're working so hard that nothing else in the world really matters except you and that task. And I suspect that sometimes you will find yourself in this state of flow, this state of intense concentration. I mean, maybe it was when you were writing a report, maybe it was when you were completing a Sudoku puzzle, could be anything like this, but essentially that moment where you're so focused on your task and that it's so interesting and so captivating that you couldn't focus on anything else except that. And I think this is really where you want to be sitting, because firstly, it's the most productive, according to the research. And secondly, because it's really the most enjoyable way of working. It's so much more enjoyable, at least in my opinion, than sitting there and doing a repetitive task like those explained by the concept grinding. And so I think that if you can find a way to get yourself into this state of flow, instead of just trying to grind through your day and get things done because you feel like you have to, if you can instead learn to really focus deeply and enjoy your work, I think that's going to end up being the more productive and the more enjoyable way of working for you. And let's kind of talk a little bit more about how exactly you could do this. There was a book that was written by an author called Cal Newport. It was called Deep Work, and essentially he talked about this idea of how you can change the way you work from being quite shallow, and when he says shallow, what he means is this moment where you're swapping between tasks constantly, and you're not really focusing intensely on one thing, but you're just more generally working and getting things done, but not in a very intentional way. And then of course on the other hand, you've got this idea of deep work, where you're focusing just on one task with no distractions, and you are so intensely focused on it that it feels effortless, because it's seamless, it just feels great, and you're just so in the moment. And these are the two ways that you can work: shallow work and deep work. And I think this is a really good way of looking at work in general, because people tend toward this idea of shallow work. People tend to gravitate toward doing shallow work. And if you don't believe me, just think about all the times that you're sitting in the office, but you're not really doing the task at hand fully. You might be doing your reports, you might be doing something, but you're also checking your emails, you've got your phone next to you and you're checking to see if someone sent you a message, if a notification's come up on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. You're not exactly intensely focused on a task. If someone walked in and walked past you that you knew and you wanted to talk to, you would just immediately gravitate towards them and start having a conversation, because that's just the natural way of working. Because to be honest, humans aren't really built in a way that encourages work, like extensive, deep, concentrated work. And we'll talk a little bit about exactly why that is as we go through the course. But essentially the idea is, if you want to get things done, you actually need to take control of how you're working. And if you want to start doing deep work and working intentionally and in a focused way that actually produces results, you need to plan it in advance. And I think Cal Newport made a really good point where he said the best way to start to do this is to do something like wake up at 5 a.m. before anyone else is awake in your house or anything, before work starts for the day, before anyone's going to message you, and just sit down for an hour or two and just work on one task and just do that. Don't do anything else. And when I did this, I found that I got so much more work done in those 2 hours in the morning than I would normally do in an entire day. So I think that's something that's really worth thinking about.